MOG isn't an alt-right movement, right? Like MOG is a return to a community that is together for the betterment of the individual, right? Like the idea of look maxing, like the idea of being your best self, the idea of dopamine fasting or working out or eating healthy, like these are the principles that every mogger has. I'm going to make my intro really brief. If you've ever heard me talk about stuff, you know I hate all of the lead in and background. I just want to get into the good stuff. But yeah, I kind of found out about Bitcoin in 2013 and mined it for like all of 48 hours before getting frustrated about my computer going slower. Fast forward to 2016 and read the Ethereum white paper. And I was like, holy, this is going to change the face of business forever. So I started writing some business plans, started to do some competitive analysis, and I realized instead of becoming a founder, I can just buy other founders' tokens. That swept me into 2017. Family and friends approached about, seeing if I can help them invest in crypto, which sent me down this hedge fund management path, where I managed outside capital from June 2018 to December 31st of last year. And along the way, invested in the initial builders round for Intuition, founded by Billy Lutke, who's a bit of a legend himself. And got to this crossroads where I had to ask myself, do I want to continue to manage outside capital and all the stress that comes along with it, or have I sort of paid my dues? And it was time to get back to the side of the industry that I love so much, which is the technology and building. So that's sort of my backstory, which doesn't give too many hints in terms of how I think about cults and communities. And I guess like my earliest and most profound observation, let's call it that, was that Doge used to be, before Shiba, the bull market flare gun, or like the bull market starting gun. And I looked back over Doge's history, and I found that either organically or inorganically, I have no idea how, huge buying demand would come into Doge right before the start of the vertical half of the bull, or whenever there'd be a 30% pullback in Bitcoin and people thought it was all over, Doge was the thing to go first. So I started realizing that, or the thesis that I came up with is that really, really early Doge OGs and bulls who kind of thought that Doge was just like really funny, because you have to understand, like in a world with no meme coins, right? Doge is hilarious. And when everybody's talking, people were still debating, like, does Bitcoin have value? You can just make another Bitcoin, et cetera, right? And that gave rise to Doge, which was like this deeply sarcastic, ironic thing that just exists. So I started to think that those with a lot of wealth just use Doge for fun, and like they were just having fun. And now that Doge correlation went away
Like
as
how did it actually started? Like was it the dog of that guy, or was it the name of the subreddit? Do you remember?
Oh, if I remember correctly, and ideally somebody can like check this, there was a lot of debate taking place around Bitcoin, and that like Bitcoin was essentially valueless, and that
Uh-huh.
anybody can just make a new Bitcoin. And like to demonstrate that was like, look how useless all these cryptocurrencies are. Here's one called Doge. And like you can mine Doge and you can keep the Doge network running. But like it doesn't do anything, right? Like the whole point was to use something so stupid to prove the point that like none of this stuff is valuable. And like sure enough, people like start going back to Intuition. Billy was an early Doge miner because he was just like, haha, this is so funny, like of course I'm gonna mine some Doge, like who wouldn't? It's a dog, right? So that was like my very first run-in with with meme coins and a lot of that cultish thinking. And I remember it was like 2019 or 2020, and we put together this group chat called the Doge Retirement Fund. with CL and a couple other big names, and we were all talking about how Doge was the generational wealth maker. For all these reasons about memes. This was pre-meme super cycle talk, right? But we were just like, of course, this thing needs to go the highest, the fastest. And the funny part is, all like 8 or 12 people who were in that chat got shaken out of Doge over the months that it took between taking these positions and then Elon tweeting about it, right? And if you think about where we are on the meme cult timeline, Elon going public about Doge kind of marks one of the massive inflection points where like the meme virus kind of broke out, and it went from, this joke and this sort of social statement to this speculative asset class, where the amount of money you could make started to take the forefront, and the culture behind it started to take a back seat. And that has massively transformed since the Doge days, where, in my opinion, now the culture takes a front seat and the speculative upside takes the back seat. In my opinion, the speculative upside of the best cults is the side effect of its social impact or its social influence. And like, I want to sort of draw this back to the topic that you've been covering here, Yoni, which is that mass movements are an investable theme and an investable asset class. And that intuition, like we're working really hard to sort of wed the cultish mass movement with technology, because we're seeing it done so well, not wed with technology, right? So like the question is, how do we start to define these mass movements? Who are people who are attracted to mass movements? What are they getting out of a mass movement, and what does the mass movement get out of them? So like there's some really good core tenets here. And there's a book I'll recommend as well. I just don't want to screw up the title. It's called The True Believer. I'm forgetting who the author is right now, but a phenomenal book on cults and mass movements. And some of the notes that you'll get from there is that, mass movements attract people who are discontented with their current situation or lives, and they're seeking a sense of purpose or identity, right? So, why do people join these mass movements? And it's like they desire some type of change, or hope, or some vision of the future that they are able to align with others, right? Like there's that sense of belonging. But you also have to understand that like it's not enough to just belong. And in my opinion, if you look at the current meme market, you have a lot of coins who are pretending to inspire belonging, right? And often you'll know them and can spot them very easily because they'll kind of just like repeat the same tropes or the same sayings that you see in other projects, or they start to just like replicate the same memes and the same imagery of other projects. And like that's because there's the culture doesn't require a high level of commitment. So like the reason I was so bullish on Mog, like in its first months and even after it went down from like 50 to 10 or whatever it was, is because the community had the highest level of commitment I had ever seen in a meme community, and simultaneously had the highest quality artwork. Like that's what first drew me to the community. It was their ability to edit videos uniquely, their ability to create unique memes. And I was just like, wow, the people involved with this are sticky. Like they're not pretending to be part of a meme so that the number goes up. They genuinely identify with what it means to Mog. They genuinely identified the Mog energy, and they're putting their time and effort into creating iconography that communicates visually that feeling.
Like
And
what was the things that first attracted you in the first place to the Mog community, and then like what were the things that you saw in the community that you said, fuck, that's something big?
yeah, well, it's this exactly. And maybe there's a bit of gut instinct or smell or taste involved here, but the community was inclusive, but they didn't compromise their values. Like you were welcomed with open arms to join a Mog space, or to get on stage, or to start your own space, or to create your own memes, or to create your own videos. But if you veered outside of the social consensus around what it meant to mog, you yourself would get mogged, right? Like if I came out and I said something like really beta, like you're going to get mogged by your community. Like there's no patience for that. And what I mean is like there's a shared sense of identity. There's a shared sense of value, and people are committing their time and energy to this, which is why it, in my opinion, is a mass movement, right? Like there was a collective understanding of the thesis. There was a collective understanding of its direction. There was a collective understanding of the valuations it can go to. There was a collective understanding of how to get there. And there was a collective understanding of what was needed to be achieved internally to get there. I remember attending some spaces in 2023 where people would get on stage and just yell. They would just yell about, like if you're not doing anything, like get out of here, like that type of energy, right? Like just no room for free riders. And that manifested over many, many, many months. And that type of culture continues to get passed on to each and every new mogger. And if you actually go back and like you study how the Navy SEALs do a lot of their working, step one is to sort of like kill the ego of the individual and build it back up as part of the collective. And I think that's what cults do so well, is they have a door, and at that door you have to check your ego, and on the other side you're welcomed into the collective effort. And that is that what I meant by that, like that high level of commitment. And it demands a certain level of personal sacrifice. It also requires that there's like clear doctrines, either verbally or written, on like how you should behave. And it needs to be like an all-consuming belief in the cause, right? Like one thing I do not follow anybody on X who shills like more than like 3 to 5 meme coins, simply because they're rudderless, right? Like they themselves have yet to give themselves to a movement, because you can't be all consuming and then also be holding like 15 or 20 different memes. Like how are you part of that culture? How are you part of that community? And then I have to second guess myself and say they probably don't even know the culture. They probably don't even know the community. And then when you start to see things through this lens of culture, community, sacrifice, a greater cause, you start to see that there's very few good cults, but there's a lot of meme communities. And I think, a lot of the stuff's high beta. You can probably, hold some of these memes that, will go up, and some will pump harder and then dump harder, whatever, price is price. But like to hold something like this and to hold it for the remainder of the cycle, like takes all consuming belief. So like I'm confident that the MOG community, like the token was under $20 million FDV, and the entire community showed up every single day on X and said, we're going to tens of billions, right? So like now that it's something like 800, 900 million, why would you have any fear of people selling? Like they're telling you it's still early. They've been talking about it for a year already. And I'm starting to see a couple new communities pop up as well that give me like a lot of similar vibes. There's an account I follow that was recommended by a friend, which is talking about a new cult called Geeko. And nothing has reminded me of the Mog cult as much as Geeko, in that it's a small community of fervent believers. They show up every day. They sacrifice their time, energy, and money to build things for the Geeko cause.
You see people like the same people every day in the
Every day,
Wow.
every day, in the same Twitter GC, in the same Telegram chats. And now just 2 days ago, I think it was 2 days ago, maybe 3 days ago, one of the Geeko whales sat next to Ansem on a flight, and Ansem tweeted about it, and he sent a selfie with his face and Ansem, but he put Geeko over his face. And there's certain type of magic, like I call that magic, right? Like there's certain type of magic when the community and the culture is at the forefront and price is in the background, right? Because like I said earlier, price is a derivative of culture. And that's also why I think that, like, if we're
Yeah,
talking about meme
definitely,
coins, like meme
definitely.
coins inherently have very high ceilings, because what meme coins are trying to
And
do
also
is put a
utility, and also utility is a derivative of culture.
yes, you can absolutely make that argument in a lot of ways, that utility is a byproduct of culture. But I don't even think you even need to define it. Let me use some historical examples. So like if you think about, you know, Gothic or mid-century or Renaissance periods of history, like the church was the patron of the arts, right? The church gave money to the artists, stonemasons, etc., to record the history of the time and place in the city. The buildings speak to us about history. The ceilings speak to us about history. The walls speak to us about history. The tapestries speak to us about history. And these individual pieces of art, if you start taking them apart, are invaluable. Like, you know, like what is the price of Notre Dame, right? Like what is the price of the Sistine Chapel? Like what should Vatican City be valued at, right? Because these are cultural artifacts of the past. So now we have something like Doge, right? Which topped out around 80 billion, and people are like, oh, that's insane. Like, is it insane for a piece of digital culture that is collectively owned by the entire world? Like, is that an insane valuation when we look through the lens of like religion? And, you know, similarly, the other thing about Geeko, other than it being a cult that caught my attention, is it's the oldest cat meme on the internet, right? And now when you start thinking about provenance, plus mass movements, plus community and culture, you start to see that like you want to identify communities that have all of these things going for them. Because when these things come together, you end up with something that's just inherently unstoppable. And at Intuition, like as we're preparing for our beta launch, this is at the forefront in our mind in terms of community building, right? You'll hear a lot of people talk about how they built a community, and I listened to the Smokey's talk on day one of this event, where Smokey sort of realized that like they put out these NFTs that they enjoyed, and it started to bring people together from a lot of other high signal places, and they started to realize the community that they had, and they started to build, from that community. It wasn't necessarily intentional to bring all these people together. It was more so just an artifact of where they spent their time and energy. And this goes back into this concept of an all-consuming belief. So more than anything, I think the projects for the second half of this cycle, and I do think, by the way, this has probably become a contrarian take, but I think you're witnessing it, Yoni, as well, is that the technically forward projects have done poorly this cycle relative to memes and
Definitely.
cults, right? I think the second half of this cycle will see an emergence of technical projects that have something to believe in, right? And this comes back to like the topic of this talk, which is believe in something. And what you have to do is you have to abstract everything I've said in terms of culture and bring it to and essentially replace culture with like the word future. And what I mean by that is people go all in their belief system, and their belief system could be as simple as what they find funny or where they find a sense of belonging. But you also have belief systems that are forward looking. What is the shared vision of the future? And Bitcoin is a great example of a really great cult belief, religion, etc., because there was extremely strong fundamental belief, essentially from I don't want to speak to I don't have firsthand experience of Bitcoin, pretty much like the Bitcoin community, like pre 2017. But from my personal experience, like from 2017 really through 2020, the majority or a lot of conversation took place around Bitcoin's fundamental role in the future, right? People saw this world where the current fiat system just could not sustain, and eventually like all this extra fiat had to go somewhere. And Bitcoin, Bitcoin plan B, Bitcoin's the lifeboat, Bitcoin's the inflation blow off valve, like whatever you want to call it. Everybody aligned on this future vision for Bitcoin. And that was enough to define its cult status or its mass movement status. And right now, I think Ethereum is having a little bit of a mass movement crisis, in that the vision of the Ethereum future doesn't feel as cohesive right now. There's still a lot of debate as to like how to best scale this thing and like how value accrues. So the vision is becoming a bit less clear. And because the vision is becoming a bit less clear, we're seeing, a little bit of fracturing there. Not that I'm bearish Ethereum. Generally speaking, I actually am quite bullish, generally speaking, but just like in terms of the near term mass movement, they're losing some of their followers because the vision's becoming a little less clear. So with intuition, we have a really clear vision of what the future looks like. And we think that the problems are like very, very real that we're addressing. And we think that these are problems that people have day-to-day discomfort with already, right? So I think you're seeing it with like what Barachain's doing. I think you're going to see it with what Intuition's doing. And that is doing a really good job at telling the story of what the future will look like. And and if you think about it, risk reward is highest. Like let's pretend that today is day zero on the timeline, and I'm going to tell a story that I think takes 1 decade to play out. Day zero is the highest risk reward, right? Like my vision of the future, which becomes either more correct or more incorrect with every passing day. So painting a picture of what and how things will change over time is a really amazing way to attract people if you have a high degree of confidence that you're right, which I think we are. And I think what we'll see is as events continue to play out, and I'm not going to go too deep into like the individual intuition thesis here, unless that's interesting to you guys, because we can back into that mass movement. But like as things move forward in time, that becomes less and less risky, which is essentially like how you have a Bitcoin ETF. It's why people buy meme coins like over 500 million, 1 billion, but they don't buy them under 10 million. And it's because a lot of people say, I don't know how to pick them, so I buy all of them. I have the opposite thesis. Don't buy all of them. Buy the ones you believe in, buy the ones that you're willing to make a personal sacrifice for, and just hold those things because as time passes, right, on that story of that meme, it becomes less and less risky if it doesn't die, right? Which means your risk reward becomes worse and worse and worse, right? Buying MOG sub 20 million to me felt like a great risk reward because I had full belief. I believed in something. But other people needed more belief to accrue to MOG, so they bought it 100 million. Or they needed even more belief to accrue to MOG, so they bought it 500 million. Or they need even more belief to accrue to MOG, so they buy over 1 billion, right? And then there's all sorts of other things that pretend to show belief, right? So they use the price to make people believe, but there's nothing fundamental for them to believe in. And that's where you get a lot of this shit just going straight up and straight down, right? Because it's just manufacturing exit liquidity by taking advantage of people's belief systems. But yeah, so that was a bit of a tangent, and I said I like to have conversations, so I apologize for that.
No, for sure. I mean, something that you said that I want to double click on is product first or community first. So, I mean, Bitcoin was really the only one that maybe also Ethereum. Yeah, but I think for the most part, what I'm trying to say is that most of the big cultures, and I don't look at NFTs as a product. So most of the cultures, including Berachain, including Monad, including I mean, I exclude, let's say, meme coin and NFT collection. They first created the culture and then created the product. Like, how do you see that trade-off? First product and then culture, or vice versa?
Yeah, I think there's no right answer. Like you should start wherever your edge is, right? If your edge is in product, start with product. If your edge is in community and culture, start with community and culture. What's interesting, however, is when you start with community and culture, there's inherently less friction. There's less social friction because there's nothing to disagree about, right? Like when you start with culture and community, everyone has a seat at the table. Everybody's voice can be equally loud and everyone can participate in some way or another. So it just casts a bigger net more quickly. As soon as product or technology comes into the fold, well, first of all, you need to have some type of knowledge or expertise to join that conversation, or you're just an audience member. Second, you might disagree about certain things. So that can be very alienating very quickly. If we think about the birth of Ethereum, right? Like Bitcoin happened and Vitalik had ideas And they were like, no, go away. So he said, okay. And Ethereum started, right? Like that was a splintering of culture and community that took place when product is at the forefront of the discussion, because inherently products can only go one direction. Like you can't, like, there's no one's running like 3 different versions of Telegram. You only have the current version of Telegram that's available. So otherwise you have to use some type of alternative. So to answer your question, there is no right answer. With intuition, it's largely been product first, right? This product's been built for years in stealth. But in that time, the story that we're about to start telling, we think will resonate very deeply with a lot of people. So in a certain way, our culture and our community is one of the products that we're going to be launching to this market, right? And the ways in which we, just how I mentioned earlier, how Mog memes and Mog videos became like very good repetitive use of iconography, which becomes the way in which we teach culture to one another. We've spent time not just working on product, but working on that story and that iconography and that repetition that we think is going to help demonstrate our vision of the future and make it very tangible for people. So our desire is that our product and our story will be the thing that creates culture and community. But one thing's for sure, you can't have one without the other. Like they eventually, I think, coalesce. Because at a certain point, if you just do community and culture, you get all of this potential energy and you get all of this human power and mind share and excitement. And that has to go somewhere, right? Like there's a Doge chain or a Shiba chain. Like these things inevitably happen because they store up so much human potential energy. And I use these terms really purposefully. I don't know if that's going to resonate with everybody, but like when you get a group of people together, you're storing up human potential energy. And that will ultimately need to be released in one way or another. It can be a creative outlet, it can be a technical outlet. But yeah, you're relatively limited in how it can be expressed.
Mm-hmm. That's cool. So, like, what do you think the principles are for a community that believe in something that you learned through, like, throughout the years that you saw in Moog and other meme coins culture? Like, what do you think are the principles that they all have in common?
Yeah, I think there's 4 things, and I've already mentioned the first, and right, and that is like mass movements are driven by an all-consuming belief in the righteousness of their cause. Like that has to be there for it to be real. Otherwise, it's pretend. Second is that like the mass movement should emerge in some type of social upheaval or instability. And like going back to Doge, like there was all of this uncertainty around Bitcoin, right? And Litecoin and all these other chains, and like Doge came to be. Third, the true believer, which is a prerequisite for cult status, right? The true believers should be surrendering themselves, or rather, should be surrendering their individual identity for the collective identity. It's just very important that there is a collective, right? Like you have this notion of the other, and you have this idea of the collective, and they stand at perfect opposition of one another. And if you look at any great war ever fought through history, like there is always the other. If you were in a capitalistic system, the other was the communists. If you were in a communist system, the others were the capitalists, right? These things always exist within some form of balance. And last is that, like, for a mass movement to truly be successful, like it must adapt to changing circumstances, right? And it must have a way to continually redefine its goals, and also like redefine its enemies. Which means that there must be some form of social hierarchy. There must be some form of division of labor. There must be generally accepted platforms for discussion of governance, right? And I use that term governance lightly, because like governance can be as simple as somebody is given power, and if they don't sort of act in accordance with what everybody wants, then that power is taken away from them, right? It doesn't need to be super codified. So I think like these 4 things must exist, and if they exist in too structured of a way, it's not fun. And if it's not fun, you lose participation. And when you lose participation, you get all these other problems. So go look at the governance, on some of these layer twos, or like look at the governance on some of these projects. Like it's not fun. They have to bribe people to participate, and even then, not that many people participate. They have trouble even, paying to get projects to come build on some of these chains. And I think what you're realizing is like this idea, like if you build it, they will come, wasn't just about the infrastructure. It was about the community. It was about the fun. It was about the connections that you make, and that vision of the future, putting that all together. So I think the bar has been raised, and how that fits into this more macro thesis is that the previous crypto bull cycles have been largely driven by infrastructure innovation. And I think we are currently in the last big infrastructure cycle, but we're moving infrastructure from consensus and transactions per second to developer tooling and use cases and features. And I think at the end of this cycle, we will have a decentralized developer stack that allows the first generation of product market fit developers to step into crypto. And you're starting to see that there's bigger and bigger and bigger companies stepping into blockchain right now. And I think the quote unquote .com bubble for crypto will take off, not this cycle, but the next cycle. I don't know how many months or years or whatever. I don't know how far away that will be, but I think we are getting closer to that. And we're seeing a little bit of whisper, right? Step In was a bit of a whisper of like product market fit. Friend Tech is a bit of a whisper that like product market fit will be important. Warpcast is a bit of a whisper that product market fit is important. And I think why you're also seeing this huge divergence between technical projects and meme projects is we're starting to see V0 of product market fit, right? Like we're seeing how good meme coins are at coordinating, essentially shilling, right? Like meme coins are this amazing thing for a group of people to rally around, come to consensus about something, and then tell the world about it. And if you have a really compelling story to tell, your mass movement gets larger and you should have more buyers than sellers. That's the simplest form of product market fit. Now, people say, oh, the first product market fit in crypto is speculation. I disagree completely. The product market fit of crypto is pseudo-anonymous coordination, right? Like the product market fit is that the same ideas that underpin Bitcoin mining and consensus and Ethereum consensus also start to underpin meme coin culture consensus. And now we can start to move up the stack of complexities in terms of coordination. And we can start to see more types of coordination taking place for more complicated use cases, if that makes sense. Because like you need this decentralized layer on top of the applications. So like what happens is you build these applications that like not a lot of people are using, and then you're like, now go run it. And there's like nobody who wants to run it because it's like not fun to run it. So like you're at this major kind of identity crisis of like, what the hell's going on here? People don't want to participate. Not that many people want to participate in the technological side of it, but there's all this participation in the social and cultural side of it. So like naturally those two will need to find some way to some type of middle ground. And I think that will come with the apps that people use the most. Like I love using Warpcast, and I'm just becoming active on there for the first time after having an account for months and months and months. And like my favorite part is like how customizable things are. Like people are adding action buttons and these frames, etc. And I'm just like, whoa, I can have a seat at the table for how I wish this platform works, instead of me tweeting into the abyss like, hey, at Elon Musk, why not motivate people to report bots by giving them like a free month of Twitter Blue? You know what I'm saying? Like you should be able to collaboratively help the Twitter experience and get rewards and benefits for it. But like I'm tweeting at nobody and no one's paying attention. And then here you are on something like Warpcast, and you can like talk to the founders and you can partake in the governance, and like you can be rewarded for your participation in your ideas. And you're just like, wow, like here is a way in which governance is being Trojan horsed into the product. And again, it's a whisper of product market fit. So I think this idea of these digital communities, these digital mass movements, and the products that they connect with, like are what crypto looks like over the next decade. But right now it's a lot of fun because you can just make some memes and videos and speculate on that. But who knows how long something like that can really last.
Yeah, yeah. Cool. That's amazing. I mean, that's it for me. I mean, Moshe, Michael, do you want to ask anything?
Yeah, I guess well yeah, first off, like thank you so much. Like that was incredibly insightful. Well, what do you think about CTOs? So like if you have a leader, right, that's leading a mass movement, a tokenized mass movement, and that leader kind of, withers away. Do you think CTOs are a good substitute for that leader, for that original leader, or do you think there are other ways that are superior to that
That's
CTO side?
That's a really good question. And I'm still, I only recently started to think about this. I mentioned that this geeko mass movement that I see in its very early infancy right now. And the story is a very close crypto friend of mine who's like a phenomenal meme coiner sent me the link, and he sent me the lore, and he sent me his thesis. And I was like, holy shit, like this thing sells itself. And he said it was like a community takeover. And I was like, what the hell? What does that actually mean? Because I'd always seen that as a meme, right? Like there's so much that is there are so many lies and so many fake things in memes that like all you need to do is get a group of people together, like launch a coin, rug it, get a group to quote unquote CTO it, and like now it's a community takeover. But that might not be a genuine community takeover, right? Like they might just be pretending to be a community takeover, which kind of goes back to that what I said earlier. So I always was really skeptical, and I always kind of saw it as like a marketing stunt, where they were just trying to differentiate themselves by saying they're like owned by the community. Where my mind started to get changed is with geeko, because I saw a lot of parallels with Bitcoin, right? Like Satoshi can't be the leader because like there is no Satoshi, right? So de facto, like it had to be the community. So we know that the model works. So what I actually ended up doing to answer this question is I started to reach out to the biggest bulls in that community on Twitter DMs and on Telegram, and everyone was super cool. And I actually set up a series of calls. I think I spoke to 5, I guess what you can call core contributors, but just like community members who were part of that takeover. I spoke to 5 of them, and I got the same story from everybody about this like toxic founder, this rug. He kept dumping. He wouldn't OTC to them. He required that they OTC him out above market price. He was like, literally, I'm going to nuke this chart to 0, or you pay me a premium. And the community said, screw it. Like, send your stables to this one person. Like, this one person we trust with our money, and they'll go broker it. And that person, that community leader, already had social reputation amongst this group of people and had that trust amongst this group of people, and just sort of became the, I'll call, benign leader, meaning they understood that like they have certain responsibilities, because there are certain things that like just like not that many people can have, like the login and password to a main Twitter account, or like can be a multi-sig signer, or can like negotiate OTC deals on behalf of the project. Like you just can't have that, like that many people doing it. But I do believe that you can have a community takeover, but it's difficult because it requires people who you trust to do the right thing, and then they have to do the right thing. And the odds that a project gets taken over by a community and that the people in charge do the right thing and they have the trust of the community, the odds of all those things happening are very, very low. And this actually goes back to a thesis I have as to like why you don't buy all the meme coins. You just buy the ones that you believe in most aggressively. And that is because, let's just look at statistics, right? Let's say that there's 100 new meme coins that launch every single day. Let's say 80% of those, which is probably low, let's say 80% of those are just real fraud, like straight to jail bucko. Like there's no intention of anything. Let's say 10% of them like mean well, but they have no idea what they're doing. They don't have the capital behind them. They don't have the distribution network behind them. They don't have the ability to create narrative behind them. So like they'll just sort of fall off into irrelevancy. We now are left with 10%. meaning that 1 in every 10 meme coins that launches is even worth considering. Now you start to look through that checklist I mentioned earlier, which is that, is there a core community? Are people sacrificing their individual ego for like the greater collective? Like, is there the concept of the other? Do they have a shared enemy? Like, what is the culture? What is, like all these other things? And all of a sudden your odds of picking the right meme coin go up tremendously, because now you're only looking at 1 in 10. And then of those 1 in 10, maybe 1 in 100 have all of those factors, right? So like that's why I think you can just like kind of all in a couple of them.
Hmm.
Because like statistically speaking, that's a really amazing way to play that game of poker. But I don't think people really see it that way. They think it's really hard to pick. So they like try to do a spray and pray. But yeah, sorry, to answer your question, I think CTOs are totally a viable path. However, just like everything else, like I don't think that all CTOs are the same. And you need to find one where there's a combination of trust that the community has in the leaders, and the leaders actually doing the right thing. And that entire relationship is authentic and not manufactured. And you get those 3 things, and your odds go through the roof that you're sitting on something special.
Well, thank you very much.
Mm-hmm.
Amazing. Nate, do you have any question for Matt?
Yeah, would love maybe to kind of get your kind of perspective and inputs about like how do you refining your thesis in a very like exact terms of. So you mentioned earlier this example of the Geeko talk, and I guess like one key issue with like figuring out and making the distinction between the noise to truth signal is that it's really hard when you have so many meme coins that are kind of trying to dominate the timeline, and you have all of this artificial activity, both in terms of social, but also in volume. So I guess like, do you think there is like a good way to maybe like, I mean, in a quantifiable way or even quantitative way to distinguish really well what is like an upcoming interesting project, kind of like set of rules or something like that you follow currently?
I have a friend who's tried to take this approach where I try to quantitatively create a list of investable memes. And I think there are metrics you can look at. I don't personally do it because, again, this is culture and community, and like culture and community is more art than science, and like it has to feel right. And you can try it, as soon as you can make the feeling quantifiable, you make it gameable, right? So it's like, oh, let's look at the number of new wallets. Oh, let's look at how much percent of supply is being held by certain people. Oh, let's look at followers on the account. Or, oh, let's look at trading volume or number of trades per day or average trade size. Or like there's all these things we can look at. But as soon as you can measure it, you can game it. But what you can't measure is the commitment within the community. What you can't measure is their creative output. What you can't measure is the stickiness of their idea or their thesis. But you need these things together, right? Like you have to have a thesis that is good with a holder base that believes. And sometimes, and actually, I think this is quite common. And this is actually, I'm glad you brought this question up. A lot of times, there's really good memes that have non-believers in them. Retardio is a really good example of this. I was very, very bullish Retardio early. And actually, and yeah, and I was kind of creating this thesis that like, this was, I guess, over nearly a year ago now, maybe a little less. I was like, wow, I believe so strongly in Mog that I want like all other things that have that energy. I want that Mog energy. And I saw Retardio and I was like, oh my God. And people loved using the word. And I was like, this is great. Like this has all the things. And I bought a bunch and I held it and it like nothing really happened. And I was like, this is stupid. Like, why am I like I started to question my own belief in it, because like the excitement that I brought to the project wasn't coming back from the core community. And I was like, oh man, like, am I the sucker? Like, am I the exit liquidity? And it took Retardio months and months and months and months and months of churn before the holder base was finally the true believers, right? And I actually never buy a meme coin that has an explosive launch. And I paper handed Pepe because of this, because I fundamentally believe that you need to churn through so much supply. You need to churn through the sniper bots. You need to churn through the momentum following bots. You need to churn through the deck screen lurkers. You need to churn through the non-believers. And all along that time, you have to monitor for a community and mass movement that's slowly growing over time, because those are the people who are setting your floor, right? Those are the people who got a paycheck and are like, oh, I'm going to put another 500 or $1,000 in this thing that I'm having so much fun doing. And that can take months, in some way, in some times years of call out accumulation, right? But like the transferring from weak hands to strong hands, we've seen it in the Bitcoin cycles, we've seen it in the meme coin cycles. We're going to continue to see it, but there's no conceivable way in my mind that something can just launch and on day one everyone's a true believer. So it's hard to quantify.
Yeah, thanks for the explanation. Just like also a quick follow-up question on that. So I think like one exciting idea, and you were mentioning it at the beginning, that like you can think about like the first generations of memes like Doge and others, like those are kind of like iconic internet memes with no clear social mission or social agenda or values. And then you have like Miladies or Mog or Retardio now, that they are kind of like, they can be right-wing coins or anti-cancel culture coins, or just like Trump coins, whatever, like any way you can frame that. But the community has some kind of like specific social customs or rituals that make them different than just like a cute dog coin or something like that. So I'm wondering, do you think there is like an edge by trying to find out coins that trying to create a new category that can be social or any other thing? Because for me, that's what makes Mog or other coins like more interesting and kind of innovative versus like the first generation of meme coins.
Yeah, that's actually something I've been thinking about, and I've been reading some accounts on X who are debating this. So I can tell you what some of the narratives are, right? On one hand, people think that meme coins are like inherently contrarian and inherently retardio. So like you want to go towards retardio culture, towards like incel culture, a non-culture, crypto culture, because like that is like the contrarian play. Another thesis is that the first half of the meme super cycle was more so crypto native, so that culture resonated. But the second half of the meme cycle will be more retail native, so like you'll actually probably move from fringe themes to more mainstream themes. And if you think about Doge going to 80 billion or Shiba going to 40 billion, like it was on the theme of just like a dog, right? Like the dog had no play. It was something that was could be universally understood by people across cultures. So that's another narrative or another take on the topic. I think, however, that the meme coin zeitgeist should be contrarian from pop culture. So if we think about what defined 2022 and 2023, pop culture was very politically correct, was very woke, was very utilitarian in a certain way, was very socialist in a certain way, which is why I think in these past 18 months, the memes that have done well are counterculture, right? Mog isn't an alt-right movement, right? Like Mog is a return to a community that is together for the betterment of the individual, right? Like the idea of look maxing, like the idea of being your best self, the idea of dopamine fasting or working out or eating healthy, like these are the principles that every mogger has, and they like expect the others in their community to have that same. And that sense of like communal individualism is very different from like inclusive woke media culture. Now, I think with the current Olympics, the assassination attempt of former President Trump, the stepping down of Joe Biden, the crime that we're seeing in major Western cities, I think we're now seeing pop culture trending back towards more, call it conservative and masculine themes, which makes me think that the second half of this cycle will be a counter movement to the pop culture once more. So I can really see, if I close my eyes, I can really see the second half of this meme coin cycle touching on more inclusive themes, more universally understood themes across cultures, and something that's something that offers like a break from the insanity of turning on the TV. Because right now you turn on the TV and it's insane. Or I guess I don't watch TV. I don't know if you guys watch TV. I don't really know anybody who watches TV, but like you pull up Twitter, you pull up X, you pull up Instagram, you pull up TikTok, whatever, like you're just fed this really extreme stuff. And it's like, where do I get a break from that? Where can I like take a deep breath and have fun, and spend some time, and in the world of meme coins, maybe even also make some money, or in the world of like new technological projects, like learn about something new or envision what the future might look like. And I'll kind of round this out with intuition, seeing as I focus like the vast majority of my meme cult energy there. I think that people are finally not just exhausted of how social media makes them feel, but are better understanding why social media makes them feel that way. I think the Twitter files were like a really big moment on like the global timeline, where it became publicly known that state level actors were directly manipulating, essentially algorithms and censoring, etc. And it's also quite clear now that like the innocent college dorm stories of like Mark Zuckerberg, etc., and these meteoric rises in these platforms, have turned from these like American dream stories to these American horror stories, where everybody who's on these platforms is essentially opting into a feudalistic system where you are granted this digital land right in exchange for your data, right? And that's what feudalism is. And as we see more and more evidence that this model is being essentially weaponized against us, I call it like our rat brains, right? Like we just love sugar water. So like we'll just keep hitting the button to get the sugar water, and we're better understanding that. So I think going back to this idea of mass movements, right? I think people are finally discontented with their current digital lives, don't necessarily feel aligned with their digital identity. And I think they're starting to get ready for like drastic change. And I think they're starting to become open to like what the future of the internet looks like. And that's where I think intuition has its mass movement moment, is understanding. And I'll kind of talk to you what we talk about there. It's like, if we just rethink the way that value flows through data, we potentially disrupt trillions in value, right? Because if you think about like Google, Microsoft, Facebook, Netflix, like all these big companies, like all they've managed to do is capture the monetization of data at the application layer. And if we can reimagine the way in which we capture value of data and move it from the application layer down to the protocol layer, we potentially completely change the face of technology forever. And we're very early in the digital age. Like we're a couple decades into the mass digital age at most. Like the idea that the system we're on is the system we're always going to be on is absurd, right? So I think we're starting to see all of these factors come together that are making people eager and hungry for a real mass movement that paints a picture of what the future can be, focused on data, identity, reputation, information. And I think the world's just ready for a new set of information rails, right? Like I call it the information economy. And the information economy is you remember earlier I was talking about how everything has a balance, right? So like every movement has an equal balanced movement. The attention economy has been ripping for a decade, absolutely ripping. And the expense of the attention economy is the quality of information and data that we get. And it's gotten so bad that people have alternative sets of facts. We've become more and more polarized, and like the opposite of everything is always true because you have all these like separate sets of facts. So naturally, like you'll have to have this counterbalance, which I think is going to be the information economy. The information economy isn't about demanding maximum attention. It's about demanding highest quality information. And when you think about that as a foundation for application development, and when you think about that as a foundation for monetization of data, and when you think about that as the foundation for the user experience, you're painting a picture for what should be, or what I hope is, like a better digital future. So yeah, that's the story that we're getting ready to tell here in a couple of weeks.
Amazing. Very, very exciting. We're looking forward for it. And Matt, thank you so much for coming.
Thanks, Moshe.